Prince William had just uncovered something buried inside Camilla's inner circle. Something that had been hidden for over 26 years. 2 pieces of jewelry. A black diamond pendant. A sapphire bracelet. And a promise made to a grieving teenage boy that had apparently never been kept. What looked like a private family matter was already crossing into constitutional territory. And William had already decided exactly what he was going to do about it. The image arrived quietly. Buried inside what looked like routine correspondence. A member of staff at Kensington Palace was processing incoming auction documentation from Sotheby's when the image appeared on screen. Standard catalogue photography. 2 pieces of jewelry laid against a neutral background. But someone in that room recognized them immediately. Not because they had seen them recently. They hadn't seen them in over 2 decades. And they were never supposed to appear anywhere again. The first piece was a black diamond pendant. The second was a sapphire bracelet. Both had been worn publicly. Both had been photographed. Both existed in documented palace records tied to a name that needed no introduction. Princess Diana, but the jewelry was only the surface. What William had already set in motion weeks before that image arrived told a far larger story. In May, William made a decision that those inside the royal estate system immediately understood as something other than what it appeared to be on paper. He liquidated 20% of the Duchy of Cornwall's entire commercial real estate portfolio. The figure involved was not modest. It was in the region of £500 million pulled from active markets in a single coordinated movement. The official statement was straightforward. Local housing initiatives. Community reinvestment. Language that sounded responsible, even generous. But inside the palace, among the advisors and financial administrators who understood how the Duchess estate system actually operated, the reaction was not approval. It was recognition. For years, more than 2 decades by some accounts, a network of private trusts and civilian-adjacent funds had been operating in the grey areas of the royal estate's financial architecture. Not illegally, in any simple sense. But in ways that quietly routed wealth toward Camilla's circle rather than the direct line of succession. These arrangements had been constructed gradually, carefully, and in a manner designed to be unremarkable to anyone not looking for them specifically. William had been looking for them specifically, and in one coordinated financial movement, he shut them down entirely. No negotiation. No transition period. No private conversation offering a graceful exit. He simply pulled the funding. His own advisors had warned him. They told him directly that the king's household and Camilla's team would interpret this as a deliberate attack. Because that was precisely what it was. They told him it would cause serious disruption to relationships that the palace had spent years carefully managing. They told him the consequences would not remain contained to financial channels. William's response was brief. The duchy resources existed to serve the people and the institution. Not private interests operating in the margins of its estate. The decision had been made. There was no compromise offered. Because none had been intended. Let me break down what £500 million actually means in this context. The Duchy of Cornwall is worth approximately £1.3 billion. It provides William with more than £20 million in annual income. Liquidating 20% of the commercial portfolio means £500 million was moved in a single coordinated action. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire annual budget of several government departments. It's more than the annual operating budget of many medium-sized countries. The Duchy of Lancaster, which Charles inherited from his mother, is worth approximately £650 million, providing Charles with roughly £24 million each year. These estates are exempt from inheritance tax. Under a deal negotiated in 1993, assets passed from one sovereign to the next are exempt from tax. If regular inheritance tax rules applied at 40%, Charles would have paid millions to the treasury. But the network Camilla's circle had constructed over 2 decades was not about inheritance. It was about access. About routing wealth through private trusts and civilian-adjacent funds that existed in the grey areas of the royal estate's financial architecture. William's £500 million move didn't just cut off funding. It dismantled the entire infrastructure that allowed that network to operate. And the message embedded in the method was impossible to misread for anyone familiar with what those funds had been doing. The year was 2000. William was 17 years old. He was still, by any honest measure, a teenager in grief. His mother had been gone for 3 years. Long enough that the world had largely moved on. Not long enough that he had. At some point during that period, William came across a photograph. In it, Diana was wearing 2 pieces of jewelry. A black diamond pendant. A sapphire bracelet. Pieces he recognized. Pieces that carried the specific irreplaceable weight of personal memory rather than institutional record. He asked about them. The conversation that followed was handled with care. The kind of careful, measured gentleness that adults deploy when they are managing a difficult truth in front of someone too young to push back effectively. He was told that the pieces had been put away. That they were no longer accessible. That they were being looked after properly in the right place by the right people. He was, in other words, told not to worry. The pieces were subsequently placed in a secured repository at Highgrove. Locked. Kept off the formal Crown Estate Registry. Not listed. Not catalogued. Not officially documented in the system that would have made them traceable and recoverable through standard institutional channels. For all practical purposes, they existed in a kind of deliberate administrative shadow. For 26 years, they were not seen. Not publicly. Not in any auction record. Not in any official inventory. Not anywhere that William or anyone acting on his behalf could have pointed to and said, "These belong here, and they are not where they should be." And then Laura Lopes walked into Sotheby's. William did not make a phone call. He did not send a message through palace channels. He did not request a formal meeting. He drove to Sandringham himself. And he brought a leather binder. Inside that binder was a document that William's legal team had prepared with extraordinary precision. A letters patent for asset reclassification. A constitutional framework grounded in existing royal legal precedent that addressed a specific and deeply uncomfortable scenario. It stated that if the reigning monarch was unable to adequately protect the Crown's historical properties due to diminished physical capacity or compromised executive function, the heir apparent held the legal standing to petition the Privy Council directly. The implications of that petition were not subtle. It would effectively position William as Prince Regent, stripping the king of executive authority over those specific assets until the matter was resolved through constitutional process. William placed the binder on the table and explained quietly and without apparent emotion what it contained. He told his father that there were 2 available paths. Charles could sign the decree before him, officially reclassifying Diana's jewelry as Crown property, held exclusively for the direct line of succession, bypassing Camilla's household entirely. Or William would take the matter to the Privy Council himself. And the question of the king's capacity to protect the institution's assets would become a matter of formal constitutional record. This was not a bluff. William had the documentation. He had the legal standing. And Charles, advised by his own team, understood both of those things with complete clarity. Charles signed. One signature. And with it, Diana's jewelry was formally reclassified as Crown property. Designated exclusively for the direct line of succession. Entirely outside the reach of Camilla's household or anyone connected to it, the king's signature dried. And within hours, the palace ceased to be a family matter. William's legal team at Fire and Company had not been waiting for the signature to begin preparing. They had been preparing for considerably longer than that. On the 23rd of May, a Maiva injunction was submitted to the High Court. For those unfamiliar with the instrument, a Maiva injunction is among the most aggressive financial tools available under British law. It does not negotiate. It does not issue warnings. It does not allow for the gradual unwinding of assets or the quiet movement of funds to safer ground. It freezes everything. Simultaneously. Completely. And with the full enforcement authority of the court behind it. Every account associated with Laura Lopes. Every investment portfolio. Every trust fund connected to her name. Locked. Alerts went out to Coutts, to Barclays, to every major financial institution that held anything under her name. The calls did not arrive as requests. They arrived as legal directives. And compliance was not optional. Laura's entire financial life stopped. She could not move money. She could not liquidate assets. She could not transfer, withdraw, or redirect anything. She was, in the language of the law, completely paralyzed. And she had no mechanism through which to immediately respond. At 5:30 in the morning on the 24th of May, before most of London had any reason to be awake, officers arrived at Laura Lopes' estate in Wiltshire. This was not a courtesy visit. This was a High Court enforcement order accompanied by a ministerial-level search warrant. A document that carries a weight of institutional authority that cannot be deflected by social position, family connection, or any form of informal appeal. The search was conducted. The black diamond pendant was found. The sapphire bracelet was found. Both were documented, photographed under official record, and seized. The process was thorough, precise, and completed without the kind of public spectacle that would have made it a headline before William was ready for it to be one. Simultaneously, his team had obtained strict confidentiality orders from the court. Orders that prevented mainstream media outlets from connecting the asset freeze to the royal collection. Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal had already begun tracking unusual movements in accounts tied to a prominent British name. Financial analysts were noting the patterns publicly. But the legal wall around the story's royal dimension held. The pieces existed in the coverage. The financial freeze. The unusual banking activity. But their meaning was legally sealed. Camilla's legal team had also been contacted by this point. Their first instinct was sovereign immunity. A constitutional protection that, if applicable, could potentially shield Laura from the legal proceedings. Their lawyers told them with considerable directness that it would not work. Sovereign immunity covers the reigning monarch and, in specific official contexts, the Queen Consort. It does not extend to private citizens. Laura Lopes, under the framework William's team had constructed, was not being treated as a protected member of the royal household. She was being treated as a civilian in possession of misappropriated crown property. And the law in that context was entirely on William's side. The legal machinery had moved faster than Camilla's household could respond. But what came next was something she had never lost before. And losing it would prove in its own way more significant than any financial freeze. William secured what he had come to secure. The succession now ran in a clean, uncontested line. The £500 million financial restructuring had dismantled the network of private trusts and civilian-adjacent funds that had been routing wealth toward Camilla's circle. The letters patent had established that the heir apparent could act when the institution was not being adequately protected. The Maeva injunction had frozen Laura Lopes' financial life completely. The search and seizure had recovered Diana's jewelry. And the court orders had kept the story from becoming a public scandal before William was ready. Diana had written those pages in August of 1997, in a private house on Spencer Land, beyond the reach of the royal archives and every institutional mechanism that had spent 15 years trying to manage what she said and when she said it. She had written them before William was old enough to understand what she was building. Before anyone inside the palace had seriously considered the possibility that she was thinking that far ahead. She had always been thinking that far ahead. They had simply never been paying close enough attention. Let me be clear about what this story is really about. The £500 million William moved wasn't about housing initiatives. It was about cutting off the financial oxygen that had been feeding Camilla's network for over 2 decades. The Duchy of Cornwall is worth £1.3 billion. The Duchy of Lancaster is worth £650 million. And Camilla? She owns one property. Ray Mill House. Worth about £850,000. She bought it in 1996 after her divorce. She paid for it with her own money. It's the only thing that is truly hers. Everything else she has ever worn or used or lived in has been borrowed. Loaned. Temporary. The palaces belong to the Crown. The tiaras belong to the royal collection. The jewels are crown property. Camilla was never an owner. She was a guest. And guests eventually leave. William didn't just recover his mother's jewelry. He dismantled an entire financial infrastructure that had been quietly operating in the grey areas of the royal estate's architecture. He didn't just protect the succession. He made sure that the next reign would begin with his own choices. Not with arrangements handed down from his stepmother's office before he had ever been consulted. That is the real story. Not jewelry. Not auction houses. Not even the image that arrived from Sotheby's. It was about £500 million. It was about 26 years of hidden truth. And it was about a 17-year-old boy who was told not to worry. This time, he wasn't asking permission. He was taking back what belonged to his mother. Subscribe to the Meghan Markle Report for more royal investigations. Drop your thoughts below. Was William right to take this action? I read every single comment. See you in the next one.